if your why is big enough, then you'll usually stick with the journey along that habit. And the why is big enough when it's outside of who you are. Yeah, if you're running for a bigger cause.
Let's talk about bad habits and people who do things that they don't like. You know, they say that they're not going to drink for a month, and then halfway through they have a drink. You know, they're not going to smoke, and then oh, I just smoked, or whatever the other bad habits are.
If you're moving away from a bad habit out of desperation because you're upset with yourself, you know, I'd say I don't want to wake up feeling crap like this again. I will never drink tequila. And of course, 2 weeks later, your friends are out, it's partying, and somebody shouts shots, and you're like, wow, I shouldn't, I'll go on then.
Right.
Yeah, so, you know, what is that? If you're moving away from something, then usually the biggest pain is closer to the consequence of that. The further away you are from the consequence of that, 2 weeks later, and, you know, I can justify it by having been to the gym 3 times, so screw it, I deserve a shot. Then it's far less likely to have some level of sustainability. If you're doing things for inspiration, you're moving towards something. It comes down to the most powerful question you can ever ask yourself when it comes down to motivation behavior. Why? Why am I doing this? Now, you look at a marathon, New York Marathon, 30,000 people. I've never ran New York. I've ran London several times and other marathons around the world. But yeah, the ethos is the same. You see that for many people, it's a huge health goal. Let's say you have 100 people wake up one morning and they feel either desperate because they're overweight and they're going to set themselves a goal to run a marathon, or they feel inspired, they want to go and do it for another reason. And they're going to say, right, I'm going to go run a marathon. It's a lifetime checkbox for a lot of people that would like to have that as a benchmark for the ultimate expression of doing something healthy. And so if you look at who made it, 12 months later, you look at the start line and you see the people going. You take a survey. I'm not talking about the people that are already in the good habits, that it's running their 4th, 5th, 6th marathon because it's something that's part of their identity as an athlete. I'm talking about the first timers. You will see more people running a marathon for something other than themselves than you will those that are doing it for themselves. In other words, if your why is big enough, then you'll usually stick with the journey along that habit. And the why is big enough when it's outside of who you are. Yeah, if you're running for a bigger cause. I share a lesson with you. When I ran the Marathon des Sables a few years ago, which is a crazy race I would advise absolutely nobody to do. And
where's that? I don't know that one.
It's a marathon a day, so 42 kilometers every day, back to back for 7 days. Apart from day 4, which is 84 kilometers, which is a double marathon across the Sahara Desert, carrying about 20 kilos, 40 pounds on your back. Water's rationed to 9 liters a day. That's for washing, cooking, hydrating, and 50 Celsius or 135 degrees. And sub-zero at night.
And you did this on purpose?
Yes. Yeah, I wasn't threatened, and there was no gun to my head. And I'll be honest, I did it out of ego. It was billed as the toughest foot race in the world, and at the time in my life, I felt taller if I stood on my ego. So therefore, let me go and prove to myself I can do this. I've conquered everything else. I've ran the marathons. I ran a marathon in a 20-kilo rubber rhinoceros suit, just because I could. And the craziest part was actually landing from a 23-hour flight from Sydney to London and getting a taxi to the start line.
Wow.
Yeah, don't do that either.
Yeah, that's not kind to your body.
No, so I'm running the Marathon des Sables. And I'm not doing it for money to raise for charity. I've got a bit of stuff that's happening around that to make me feel good. But, I'm doing this for me. I'll be honest. This is me against me raising the bar. I was in my early 30s and this is where I'm heading. And so I decided that push. On the day of the double marathon, I woke up with food poisoning. Ooh. I tried to save water the night before by not hydrating my food enough. And, it was a bad move. I was throwing up. I was, retching out of both ends. I had no strength. My friend had to help me lift my rucksack to put it on. There's 600 of us at the start line for that day. The gun goes off on an 84-kilometer, 52-mile stage. And we've already run 100 miles at this point. I've got blisters on blisters with Sandy, and I've got, it's tough. The body's beat. And I've got to muster up the courage to run 84 kilometers that day, running through the night as well, where it's sub-zero temperature. And I set off because, my ego was pushing. By 8 o'clock that night, I couldn't run for the first 4 hours. I was just too in bad shape. But then I have to run because you get taken out of the race if you're behind the cutoff points. So I've got spasms in my shoulders. I'm on anti-inflammatories, and it was a nightmare. So 8 o'clock that night, the sun's going down. I've ran best part of 30 miles. I've got another 20 miles to run. Temperature's dropping, so I've got to keep running to stay warm. I'm running on a compass bearing in open desert, right? You're not tracks, this is dunes, wadis, and I'm done. I'm absolutely, there's not 1 ounce of motivation left. There's no positive self-talk. This is it, forget it. At that point, something really unique happened. A moment I'll never forget. I heard this sort of trudging noise through the sand, and I kind of looked up. I'm on my own, I look around. And there's 2 people coming towards me, both competitors with numbers on their chest. And one of them had his head down, and one of them had his head up. And then I noticed they were tied at the wrist to each other. And the guy with his head down was a blind Korean guy in his late 60s.
Wow.
And the person he was tied to was his guide. And I watched them in silence just go past me, trudging in the sand in the distance. I'm like, wow. And I started asking myself a question. I'm a student of human behavior. I'm like, what possesses somebody who's clearly not an athlete, the guy's a pensioner, run the toughest foot race in the world, where he can't even see where to place his feet, and we're running in unkind terrain where one wrong slip you can break your ankle, let alone the extremity and the extremeness of what it is that we're doing. And I'm like, I've got to find out what motivates that guy, because I'm young, I'm fit, and he's ahead of me right now. Right? How? Why? And I ran after him to find out, and I learned through the guy he was tied to was also his translator, that he not only ran this race, he ran it every single year to raise money for the hospice that had looked after his brother when his brother was dying of cancer. And I'm like, well, it was like a slap in the face with a ping pong bat. I'm like, if ever I needed a reminder, a lesson, that it's not about me. When I focused on me, I got as far as crying on a rock, thinking I was about to quit. Telling my ego that, it was a fucking son of a bitch for talking me into this damn thing in the first place. And when I saw that expression of humanity at its greatest mark, to be able to contribute beyond himself in the pain and the suffering because there was something bigger driving him than his own why. I learned a huge lesson about breaking bad habits, about motivation, about everything I needed to learn. If your why is big enough, in other words, it's outside of you, why are you really doing this? Is it to make more money? Or is it to give your kids a better education that you didn't have? Is it so that you can drive a fast car so you can prove to the world that you're better than the person the teacher said wouldn't start their own business or wasn't good enough? Or is it so you can inspire other people? And so, if you're struggling breaking your habits, check your why. Because if it's ego-based, it'll get you as far as it got me, which was on a rock, a couple of 100 kilometers, into a desert, wondering what the hell I was doing, sitting down, giving in.
Did you give in?
No, he inspired me. He inspired me to finish the race that day. That stage, I ran another 26 miles the day after and then finished the race the day after.
Wow.
And I owe it all to a blind Korean guy I'll probably never meet again. And a huge lesson. It's not about me. You see mothers that lift cars off children, right? Because the body overrides every active limitation at that point. You see people get out of bed. Navy SEALs are doing it for a bigger reason. Napoleon summed it up beautifully. He says, you can shout and scream at men all you like, but they will die for medals and ribbons. Something that is beyond them, something that they can go towards that's bigger than them, that represents something to them that leaves a bigger legacy. So, you can try and biohack everything and try a habit for 21 days and, shock yourself and all the rest of it. But ultimately, if your reason for doing it is bigger, all of that may assist, but it's not the be-all and end-all.